Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. I'm Jon Brandt, Director of Professional Practices and Innovation here at ISACA. And joining me today is Richard Hollis, Director of Risk Crew, to talk about his article, The Circle of Failure, Why the Cybersecurity Industry Doesn't Work. Thanks for joining us, Richard.
Thanks for having me, Jon.
Oh boy, we're going to have a good time here today.
Yes, indeed.
Before we get started, if you could just kind of introduce yourself, give a quick background to our viewers, and background, education, and maybe even hobbies. We'll just get a little personal here today.
Okay, let's do that. Jon, I'm an information risk management professional. As you can see from my gray hair, I've been in my field for about over 30 years. I started out in Washington, D.C. I was doing embassy security for communications back when computer security meant tempest shielding a WAN computer. It didn't even have a name in terms of security, but did that for quite some time. And then I was actually part of the Americans trying to rebuild the bugged U.S. Embassy overseas. So I started and cut my teeth on security in the government. I left that after about 10 years and took a job with Philips that brought me over to Europe as their director of security, where I was responsible for information security of the company and safeguarding their intellectual property. They had a Lucent joint venture at the time. Anyway, I left that to start my own company, which is now Risk Crew. We're a product agnostic consultancy. We're located in London. We're fairly small. We're under 30 people all total, but we help our customers identify, minimize, and manage the threats to their businesses. And we do that through things like penetration testing and risk assessments, as well as risk management, GRC like ISO and GDPR and PCI, et cetera. So big picture, I think I've spent the bulk of my career preaching the gospel according to its process. It's not the product, which you certainly will see and will come to discuss in terms of the article. But I'm probably a very fortunate risk guy in so much as I've been very lucky to be a part of what I consider, looking back, some real change and affecting real change. And I really love what I do. I'm one of these people who really, I get up in the morning, I actually love to come to work.
That's actually really awesome here. As you were giving your background, we probably have very similar beginnings. I spent 20 years in the Navy working in and around intelligence community. So I did a lot of different disciplines of stuff, and I can appreciate your beginnings and where you've kind of springboarded into here. Not surprisingly, right, is you kind of have with that understanding. I think I have a better understanding why the tone, if you will, of your article. We'll just as politely as we can, right? Like as I was reading this article, you struck me as this individual. You're going to call it the way it is, and I certainly can appreciate that. There's too much platitudes, that's out there in the industry at large, and we really need to have these hard conversations. Tell me a little bit about what inspired this particular article.
That's a good question. I don't think I'd call it inspiration. I think the article was born of a white paper. We did about a 30-page white paper that analyzed what we thought were 5 fundamental flaws in the design of the cybersecurity industry, from product vendors to managed service providers to internet service providers to businesses to CISOs and cybersecurity professionals like myself. So we had a big picture view that we took of the industry now, and the article is a small reflection of that. But in general, the ideas that were in the white paper and that went on to be a part of the article weren't inspired. They were, in fact, born of a certain frustration and bordering on depression, I should say. I started out by saying I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm coming to the point, I think, professionally in my life where you look back on your career and you think, what What have I done? Have I affected any real change? Have I been a part of something that actually has moved my profession? So, that's the reflections of an old man, maybe. But as I started to take stock and look around and look for the successes in my industry, unfortunately, I didn't find that many. So I started to become, I started to, my perception then started to change in terms of well, I'll tell you here, Jon, here was the tipping point was clearly the pandemic. Okay. Where I'm running a service and my customers start calling me and say, oh my gosh, I've got unsecured users working from unsecured home locations from, public Wi-Fi connections. And I would say, well, pull out your business continuity plan. And they would say, well, we didn't anticipate this in the business continuity plan. And I would think, you didn't anticipate users coming out from behind the perimeter using unsecured devices and unsecured connections. And I thought, how did we get this wrong? How have we been talking about business continuity for the last 25 years without the pandemic in mind? And I saw the effects of the pandemic. It's like we talk one thing and we do something, and then something happens, and it's like, oh, what's that film, where you wake up every day and you have no memory of the day before? That's how it's Groundhog Day. And it just struck me like that. I thought, how had we not seen and how were we not properly prepared for the pandemic? And anyway, I think that was the catalyst for me starting to look around and saying, my assumption was our last 25 years of focus on business continuity had us well prepared for the pandemic, and it didn't. We failed catastrophically. And so, of course, breaches soared during the pandemic. And it was it was my first clear example of we are constantly seem to be behind the curve in our industry.
So that's a very fair point, right? I think, when we look at things, as we're going to kind of dive into, the first thing that, vendors are a good target. Let's just, right? Like at the end of the day, like it's a love-hate relationship there because they sell products largely that they built that may or may not be, when I describe this, it's the proverbial, square peg in a round hole. This is what we built. Yeah. This is what you need, regardless of if it really suits your needs. And then I would hope, and perhaps you can shed some light on this for our listeners, is that in the past, these investments were very large. So you got to be a point where as the industry in the occupation field matured some and identified that an investment may not be workable for them. Now, they've already made a big investment. So now, they went to the CFO, executive team, hey, this is what we need to buy. And then somewhere down the road, chances are, more times than not, this isn't what we needed, or this isn't working, or these are the shortcomings. And then it's like, the stories I've heard from people through my walk and my work is that then they can't walk away from it. So, one or two things happens. They either unplug it, right? It's like, well, this isn't going to work. Or after a set amount of time, typically sparked by some breaches or whatnot, and in additional investments, then they're able to make adjustments. Are we still seeing the lingering effects through your work that we have a lot of expensive security investments out in place that are just not, they're underwhelming, right? And just not what the business needs. They're not tied to actual business requirements.
Our industry is led by product vendor marketers who say, you remember when I first started 20, 30 years ago, secure internet, buy a firewall. Firewall equals security. Check the box. We connected the firewall, but we forgot it's not about the firewall. It's about the maintenance, the monitoring, the configuration. It's the process behind the firewall that gives you any kind of connectivity security. All right. So then no, it's not a firewall. We're getting malware. Okay. We have anti-malware solution. Then we move to, all right, we're still getting breaches. We need an intrusion detection system. Oh no, now we need an intrusion prevention system. So when when the industry vendors invest in technology, they need to sell and make sure that they get a return on that investment. And so the market is pushed by security equals this widget, and buy a product to be secure. Now, I have two issues with what you talked about. The first and the biggest issue that I don't think we talk about is these products they don't work. I don't think they work, and I don't think we talk about that these products that they don't work. Malware products. I've got 4 anti-malware softwares running on my laptop right now, and I still get infections. So I don't understand this. I don't understand how we can still get malware if we've got anti-malware. I still don't understand how we can get intrusions that are undetected if we have IDS systems that we've invested on. And you're right, and that's what I hear you say is, well, 1-2 years, it's not effective. It's not, for me, I hear it's not working. I hear this from my clients. I bought this IDS and I've just had these undetected intrusions. So is it a configuration issue? It's just the products, or is the product just not fit for purpose? And I think it's a combination of two. But you've invested in the technology, and you've therefore have a fiscal responsibility to get your most out of it for as long as you can. And before a new technology says, no, you don't need an intrusion detection, you need an intrusion prevention system, and we all follow the vendor messages, along with the market. But my main problem that I don't think we talk about is cybersecurity products don't really work. And I see. Sorry, go ahead.
You said, fit for purpose, and that's such an important term that's out there that we increasingly need to talk about. And I think all your points are valid, right? At the end of the day, one of the things that that was written in here, that all the products have been reactive. And that's very fair. Like, I don't, to your point, no one should be able to can really disagree with that. I'm sure there's folks out there right now that are going to argue with advances in AI and whatnot, but at the end of the day, those are still informed by past events and some of the behavioral detection stuff that's going on there. So I'm not convinced that's going to get us to the promised land. I share your frustration in that regard. One of the things that underpins this, though, at the end of the day, is how can a security practitioner, any company, how can you truly protect what you don't know you have? And that message just continues to permeate out there, how we're really bad at the basics. Anything you want to add to that point there?
Well, first of all, reactive for me means that we're responding to a situation rather than creating and controlling a situation. And I've been in security my whole life, and creating and controlling a situation is the essence of security. Okay, so when you're reactive to a threat actor, all right, you're just defending yourself. You're like a fighter in the ring. You get punched in the head, and you put on a head gear, and then your opponent punches you in the stomach, and you react to the stomach punch. And being constantly when our products are constantly in reactive mode, all right, we're constantly, and then we prepare for the next punch. It doesn't come in the face or in the stomach or where we anticipated, because that was the last punch. And so our products always seem to be addressing the threat landscape of the year prior. Okay, because that's the last punch we took. And so we've made a big investment to take that product to market and to install it into our systems and protect our information assets with that. And then along comes another threat. And that's when I say our products are reactive rather than proactive. They're not anticipating threats, they're reacting to threats. And that's a big, for me, my example earlier, the move from an intrusion detection system to an intrusion prevention system, for me, that was brilliant. That was brilliant. And I don't see a lot of that across our industry today. And if you believe AI is going to take us there, that's what I'm hoping as well, that we use AI to anticipate threats and get ahead. But when our products are reactive rather than proactive, we allow our threat actors to set the pace of the game. Okay? And this is what we say in the article and in the white paper. It's like we're buying knives to take the gunfights. We are constantly not adapting as fast as our threat actors. And we don't meet the skills, the capability, the resources of our threat actors because we're reacting from the last punch, which happened a year ago, and now we've got a product that'll stop that. So when you're reactive rather than proactive, you're always gonna allow your adversary to set the pace of the game, and that's where we are, and that's where our industry is. The threat actors set the pace of this game, and our products come out a year or two after some big problem that we all acknowledge we have, and then we find solace in that until we take another punch.
So in your article, you talk about FUD, and for the couple people out there who may not know what that is, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And fear sells. We see it in all walks of life, right? Sensationalism sells. From your perspective, so FUD was very rampant, I would say, pre-pandemic for certain. And then, but as the pandemic waned, do you believe that it's as prominent as it was, or has the industry really become a little desensitized to it just because breaches are just so common and, they just permeate the headlines, and we see these big headlines and we're not seeing any substantial shifts?
Not from my clients, not from what I see. I still see, for me, FUD is the enemy, and it's everywhere, and it's still it is the presence that moves our industry from my perspective. I see it everywhere. I see it in every conference presentation title, in every blog, in every article, in all the website content from our vendors and our service providers. I see it in all the images that we see of hooded hackers hunched in the shadows over keyboards, emblazoned with skull and crossboards. Be afraid, be very afraid. And you're right, that sells, and that's in a lot of industries, but our industry lives and breathes it. Even the term, for me, FUD it's wartime propaganda, right? It's weapons of mass destruction. It's be afraid, be very afraid. Buy the products from us to protect you from them. Us versus them. That's what's being played out. And the problem with FUD is we base our strategies on FUD and not on what's good for our businesses. Okay, so we have an emotional basis for responding to our cyber threats and not a rational, well thought out strategy. So when fear is your reason for doing something, you're not acting rationally. That is the problem with FUD. FUD, you're right, John, FUD's in every industry. But our industry, we live and breathe it. Be afraid, be very afraid. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. I am so sick and tired of hearing that, and I've done this for 30 years. That doesn't help the problem. Getting people afraid doesn't help the problem. It pushes products is what it does. In my mind, in my industry, that's what I see it for. So we end up basing our fear and replacing product for strategy.
So on that note, though, right? Like, I think it highlights the criticality in where we're seeing the behavioral aspect of cybersecurity, right? Because, we have vendors that are, they're pushing products, but we largely, and whereas the products could help, especially if they help us be able to turn the page, so to speak, right? And become more proactive in learning. But within all of that, like all of these things, first of all, products are created, tuned, maintained by humans, right? And we're all fallible at the end of the day. So to me, between that aspect of it on the operational side of things, and then there's, we talk about the end users being the human firewall and the first line of defense, per se, right, within the organizational structure. We're at this crossroads of technology versus human psychology in a lot of regards, right? And even to what you were talking about with the buying decisions and whatnot. So from your professional, you've been in this, doing this for a long time. You got a really deep background. How do we turn the page?
It starts with a strategy. How do we turn the page? Remember when you and I went off for training at our super secret location, and we learned the secret handshake, and we said cybersecurity is about protecting people, process, and technology. And yet, I do not. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never seen a company that allots 1/3 of their budget to people, 1/3 of their budget to controls and process, and 1/3 in technology. It all goes into technology. Okay, so we mistake our strategy for just technology. It's a firewall. It's an intrusion detection system. It's the next thing. All right, and that to me is a problem. Is our focus? We mistake product for strategy. And I tell you, do you know of any company who spends 1/3 of their security budget on information security awareness training? No, nobody does. And yet we all know that the basic strategy is to protect people, process, and technology. And 2/3 of our strategy goes unaddressed. So, and that for me is my challenge with any customer, any client I talk to, is saying you've got attack vectors, you've got threat vectors through your people, through your process, and your technology. And quite frankly, the technology is the easiest one to deal with. So, what about your people? What about your process here in terms of getting access to information assets and understanding the threats in these vectors? But it doesn't, because the industry is around selling product and selling services on technology. So our focus becomes technology. And I'll say it again, from my perspective, this technology is not fit for purpose. It doesn't work. Case in point, I've got a client who calls me up and says, I've got ransomware. And I said, geez, that's just terrible. Do you have anti-malware? And he says, I'm running 4 anti-malware solutions. I said, what is malware? What is ransomware? Ransomware is malware. Okay, you understand that you're running anti-malware solutions and you're getting ransomware. So you've got a product that doesn't work. And that's the last thing we seem to think about, is that, this fit for purpose, we mistake product for strategy, and the product is not fit for purpose. And so there's another breach and we're all just shocked.
So you talk
I'm starting to depress myself again. And I promised I wouldn't do that. I promised my wife I'd try to keep optimistic today. I'm not being negative. To me, that's a realistic view. Ransomware is malware. Who isn't running malware? And so why is ransomware a problem? And why aren't we going to our anti-malware vendors and saying, why do I have ransomware? Isn't this your job? This is why I bought your product.
They're all fair questions, right? At the end of the day, I think, but let's talk about strategy though for a second, right? Because I would agree with you, right? All too often, for as long as you and I can remember, where did security start from? We just tried bolting it on, and that doesn't work, right? That got us nowhere. So strategy is not new. However, let's talk about the present prominent strategy in play, right, with zero trust. It's not new. It's largely rebranded, assume breach mindset. It's largely caught on. What do you, in your opinion, from where your work in the industry, working with customers, give me a pro and a con right now of zero trust in play. Like, where is it succeeding and where is it still lagging, despite a lot of folks getting behind it?
First of all, I think zero trust is an honest assessment of where we are today in the industry. Trust nothing, trust no one. I think that's for me, old guy like me, that's Ronald Reagan. Trust but verify. I think that's a refreshingly honest approach to our industry. My problem is the con would be that not a lot of businesses can afford to take that position and that as a baseline for their strategy. One, just because of technology and business operational issues, and two, because of their prior investment in trust technology that clearly isn't working. And so now we're moving, and I heartily endorse the trust no one, zero trust approach. So I see it on one hand as in fact part of what I'm trying to draw attention to in terms of things aren't working. So there is no such thing. Cybersecurity, oxymoron, no such thing. It's about identify, minimize, and manage the threats. That's zero trust for me, and that's been in my DNA ever since I've started. For every day of my professional life. So for us to articulate it as zero trust is a very good thing, and this is exactly what I get my clients to understand. There is no such thing as a secure computer. It's an oxymoron. So what are we going to do about that? And we manage the risk is what we're going to do. But again, I get pushback from clients because they have an infrastructure of 20 years of investing in information security technology and managed services, and they're running a security incident event management service, and they're running, and it's not working, and they're still suffering breaches. So it's kind of I'm finding that there's a pushback because people don't want to admit defeat. And of course, then what do you do? What do you do if there is zero trust to be had, and we can trust nothing and no one? There's no technology to be trusted. That doesn't sit well with people who have a budget, who are trying to apply that budget, as surgically as possible with the maximum results. And I don't know. I think it's going to be a balance. While I think naming it for what it is surely brings it out into the open, and therefore we have to deal with it. I think that there's a legacy reluctance to accept that is the reality of today.
And I think you nailed it right there, right? You had talked about, on the positive side, it's an honest assessment, right? And humility is a very powerful thing in life in general, right? Like we don't know. We're always constantly learning, whether that learning is willingly or via pain. But there's that we're stuck, right? Like, yes, we made investments, there's infrastructure in place, but that's also part of the systemic failure right now, right? Like I look back, like when I was on active duty afloat, like one of the big problems we always had was like the systems were controlled by different program offices, and undoubtedly they never talked to one another, right? So it wasn't not until you started connecting systems did you actually start seeing the challenges and understanding things. And really, that was my earliest understanding of that, whether was the military, the government, companies, they largely don't understand their systems that are there, what's quote unquote normal, what, from a data flow perspective and whatnot. So, but how do you, you have to start somewhere, right? And to acknowledge that and be like, okay, how we got here doesn't matter anymore. The threat landscape has shifted. It's very dynamic nowadays, and you have to start somewhere. One of the things that I see as that I've heard of as a solution that I think is just another Band-Aid is, there's some service providers that come out and say, listen, we're basically going to encapsulate your network, right? And it was touted as a zero trust solution, to which there are no zero trust products, right? There are products that will help you achieve zero trust. And that's one of the misnomers. And one of the things that I think, I hear in your frustration is marketing folks are great on grabbing a hold of buzzwords and just to kind of to advance their sales cause. But if you're to the novice or to the overworked, understaffed security teams that are in play, to which there's a lot of them, it's easy to somehow just grab at the path of least resistance. And so again, we have to start somewhere to really start making some better choices on investments and where things can get peeled back some. Good friend of mine, Chase Cunningham, right, aka Dr. Zero Trust, right? I served with him. He does a lot of work in that space, and one of the things, like in his work with customers and clients, and through his advocacy, is If done right, again, you need a strategy, and that's one of the things that he just browbeats. You also start to identify all of the different solutions that are in play, sometimes because they're not under the same umbrella. And I think that's probably, I know your larger companies is probably where you yourself would see that.
I don't. Okay. So first of all, I would take exception to say that, zero trust is where we are. Zero trust, as I understand it, is the acknowledgement, and I don't think as an industry we have fully accepted zero trust as where we currently are, because I don't think we have fully understood where we are today. When I say, and I've seen that from the feedback I've gotten on this paper. I'm going out there saying, the security products we are buying and have been buying over the last 20, 30 years to secure our infrastructures are in fact insecure. There's zero-day vulnerabilities in SonicWall. There's, RSA loses its code. It's, the very products that we have been invested in, and we're currently monitoring, and we've got an emotional and a financial investment in these products and services. They are proving to be, in fact, insecure. Okay, so I don't think that we as an industry have come to grips with that. And then and only then can we take the concept of zero trust and say, if that is in fact the status quo, that we can't even trust the integrity of the security products and services that we have deployed, past tense, currently and current tense, that we're deploying today, where do we go from here? So I think, for me, the concept of zero trust is very new. My clients don't use that. For me, I heard it from ISACA, and I just jumped up and down when I did. Yeah, but my clients and the business on the street doesn't understand. Wait a minute, you can't trust anything, and they're still in shock. And it's going to take, for me, it's going to take the market 2 or 3 years before we understand. And then if that's where we in fact are today, where do we go? What's the strategy to go forward? Because we're still dealing in a legacy of failure is how my perspective is in doing this day in, day out for customers.
That's a really good perspective there, and I appreciate the deck plate view, if you will, right? You're out there working with customers and clients all the day. And like, for those of us that are not, still actively practicing and you're working with your clients, like you would think by just combing, different media outlets, your main sources of information, you would think that everybody gets zero trust. And so the feedback is obviously, that's why I love these conversations, right? At the end of the day, because in my role, it's like, okay, hey, here's an opportunity here for ISACA to debate, to peel that onion back, right? And to be a little bit more deliberate in where do we have gaps in content. But that's not, that's like the secondary benefit of this conversation here. In your article, you're highly critical of a lot of different things, and rightfully so. I think, to make good use of the airtime, right, and your views here, why is it not in the vendor's best interest to solve the problem? Let's rip that Band-Aid off and let's just put that out there.
Let's just rip that Band-Aid off, because it's hanging right out in front of us. We don't seem to acknowledge it. For me, I talked about epiphanies. One of the first things I remember saying it out loud: cybersecurity vendors profit from the insecurity of computing. That's a fact. And it's not a fact I dwell on, and it's not a fact that I ever heard at a conference, but that is a fact. It's kind of like the pharmaceutical industry that makes a lot of money treating the viruses, the colds, the sneezes, the aches, the pains, rather than finding a cure for the common cold. There's so much money generated in our industry from treating the viruses and the malware and all these little symptoms that we struggle with in cybersecurity. So it's a fact. And the other clear evidence of that is after every breach, the top 10 security providers, their share prices soar. Why is that? Why are cybersecurity vendors in our industry, why do they profit from breaches? Shouldn't they profit from keeping systems secure? Shouldn't it be the inverse? And to me, that kind of logic is right in front of us. I watch, after WannaCry, stocks surge from the very people who should have prevented WannaCry. And you think, that's odd. That's very strange. How do they profit from from breaches when they should be profiting from stopping breaches, because that's their mandate and that's why we bought their product? So I think it's acknowledging that simple dichotomy when I say when we look at vendors to understand what's at play. They make a lot of money from our problems. They do. That's a fact, and that's okay but here's what I'm saying: as long as the money we exchange with them is to solve those problems. And I don't see a lot of evidence that those problems are being solved. From ransomware to our continual problems that we've been plagued with for the last 20 or 30 years. The breaches alone are evidence that our products are failing us. So I don't. It's funny because the profit margins year after year after year go up. The breaches year after year go up. Our spend on cybersecurity year after year goes up, and yet our breaches go up. That's an inverse relationship. It seems like to me, the more you spend on cybersecurity, the breaches should go down. And those two statistics aren't correlated at all. It's an odd thing to me and I don't see this in any other industry. I think it's very particular to our industry that the ineffectiveness of our products and services, in fact, generate more money for the very people who sell those products and services.
So I think that's a fair assessment, and I really can't argue with that. However, right, to take an opposing view on this, wouldn't it's easy to say that the widgets and the technology is failing us. But at the end of the day, listen, security is not sexy, right? Like if it was easy, everybody would be in it. There's a certain mindset you need to have, with it. And I sense this about you, like you're more of the skeptic, right? And I share, it's easy to be very pessimistic in this with what we see. But are businesses not helping themselves either, in the sense that the two core principles of least privilege and need to know, and how they actually compartmentalize access to data within their company, are they making their problem worse? Acknowledging that breaches are common, that that the industry, the vendors have not solved problems, are they not also helping themselves because they've not properly categorized their data and done data classification drills?
Absolutely. I'm not saying, John, I in no way, by the way, I in the paper that the article is based on, we talk about 5 failures, and the last failure is businesses. And this is exactly what I bring up. I'm not just pointing one finger at product vendors and saying our products don't work. I'm pointing at what I feel are anomalies in the design of our industry and how we do not incentivize success. That's what I'm trying to do. But you're absolutely right. Businesses bear a large portion of the blame. I'm saying that businesses, are buying product that doesn't work, and they should be accountable for that. Vendors should be accountable for that. And I'm saying that they're not fit for purpose, and that should be considered by businesses when trying to divine a strategy and select technology that will help them identify, minimize, and manage the threats to their businesses, to include the isolation of their information assets, et cetera. That puts the onus on them to have a strategy. So I absolutely take on and agree wholeheartedly with your point. But part of that, John, is the businesses, when they do have a strategy and they're ready and they have separated and segmented their information assets, and they've got a very distinct strategy. A security incident and event management, for instance, a SIM, they go out and buy a SIM management solution. All right. That 40% of SIM alerts are false positives. Now, my first problem with that is, why do we call them false positives? Okay, they're alerts and they're not right. So we're going to call them, why don't we call them what they are? False alerts. But no, we call them false positives. It sounds better. And that's, again, the marketing, messages that we get. But 40% of them are incorrect. Now, here's my position is, when your product is wrong 40% of the time, maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, but maybe your product is not ready for market. And yet they take it to market and we buy it. And so 40% of the time, it is a false alert, false positive. And then we stop, and what happens? Alert fatigue. We stop investigating it. We stop because we're tired of getting off our seats and going and investigate something that turns out 40% of the time is wrong. Yet another false alert, a false alert, a false alert. And so this is what I'm trying to draw attention to in our industry. All right, buying something that's not fit for purpose. When you do have a strategy and you understand what you want and you go to the market to enforce that strategy. But you're absolutely right, Jon. It starts with the business. The business has to have a strategy that includes segmentation of their information assets and need to know and all these things, these foundational principles. We don't follow that. You can't expect product to come to your aid, no matter what what your business model is.
So what can we do, right? Like at the end of the day, you talk about the very people that are charged with solutions are prospering off of breaches, whatnot, and that's fair. My gut says like without the industry, right, basically snubbing our nose and balking at vendors, right? Because market share drives a lot of stuff. Let's just be real, right? Like if you're selling products, there's not a whole lot of incentive to be as responsive to customer needs. But if all of a sudden sales drop, word gets out, a lot of bad press. Like, I'm not a fan of some of the tactics that we increasingly see out there. Because in a perfect world, customer success managers and product managers, like there's good relationships between the companies and the vendor, but all too often, and not just specific to this industry, it seems like not until they get some bad PR is the damage control happening, right? So what can we do to help improve? Let's talk about the vendor issue, and then the service provider, like your MSPs that are out there. Let's just talk about those two things. What can the industry at large begin to do to affect some change?
Good question, Jon, because I'm not just beating a drum. For me, the fundamental problem is my failure. My failure as an information security management professional. And when I talk to my clients, I think the core of this problem is that we have not applied our own standards of quality to the very industries we work in. Okay. In terms of vendors, you buy a flat screen TV and it doesn't work, you take it back. You buy a toaster, it doesn't work, you take it back. But you buy a firewall anti-malware solution and it doesn't work and you still get ransomware. Why don't we even think to take it back? So what I'm suggesting is the core of all these problems are on us as consumers. All right, we're buying things that aren't fit for purpose, and we're not making our vendors accountable for them. We're buying products that have 0-day vulnerabilities. Why? Because even security vendors don't practice security by design. Why is that acceptable to us? Why do we go back and buy that product again? And we buy that product again and buy that product again. And we don't even enforce. I've got a brother, I don't want to go out to eat with him because, if there's not enough ice in his water, he sends it back. And then he calls me because he's got an online business. He says, I got ransomware. And I said, have you called your ISP? Have you called, what about your malware provider? And he doesn't make that connection between his business and the industry, where in every other aspect of our lives, if we're unhappy with something, we demand better. And that's my point in all this. The failures that I'm seeing, all come back to us as industry professionals who haven't demanded more accountability for, once we do have a strategy and we buy a product and it doesn't work, why aren't we taking these things back? If we buy malware and it doesn't work, we're getting ransomware. Why aren't our malware providers paying our ransomware? Because that's what we would do in any other industry. You buy something and it doesn't work. So for me, that's the crux of the issue It's a consumer issue that we're not asking for more from our service providers and our vendors. And so they're selling us and we keep buying it. And if we don't demand better quality, we'll never get better quality. And so I'm suggesting it starts right there, to make it very personal. And if something doesn't work, you pick up the phone and you call your vendor and say, I bought the sim and 40% of the time it's wrong and you're wasting my time. And, and I'd like a refund. And you're not going to get a refund. But you know what? There are about 4,000 other enterprise level security vendors out there who are vying for your dollar, your pound, your yen, your euro, that you can start to make the change in the industry by demanding better. For me, this is a quality issue driven by the buyer. And if we all started to demand a little better, maybe, just maybe, we'd start to get it. Get better products, get better services that actually work, but we don't. There seems to be no accountability for these purchases. And with all the money we spend on cybersecurity, that's just amazing to us that we don't apply our personal qualitative, requirements that we do in our own life to the very industry we work in and cut our trade in.
So the thing that comes to mind in this, right? And anytime you start talking vendors, and especially like many partners, right? There's always there's the finger pointing. So for a vendor, let's say, we're not going to name names here, but let's just say some well-named vendor, and you picked up the phone, and so they're selling a SIM. You call your vendor up and you say, hey, listen, this is 40% alert. I agree with what you're saying, but we're also in an industry that we've largely made ourselves out to be the victims, right? The FUD has driven, we've got this large shortage of folks, right? We don't have enough talent. We have a skills issue, right? The skills gap, which, I don't like the word at all because it just doesn't speak to technical stuff. So what's to prevent the vendor in those cases from coming back and be like, no, it's actually not the product, right? And then actually putting the onus right back on there, right? Because you end up in that. I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but I also think that there's a lot of the purchases out there that in, companies that they may not actually have the deep knowledge to actually even understand or to articulate where those specific gaps are. And is that maybe part of the problem here, is that the feedback to the vendor is not sufficient enough?
First of all, you're absolutely right. That's part of the problem. All right, we buy things that we can't. We buy machines we can't operate. That we don't have the skills. We don't. But I don't buy the victim. I don't buy we're victims. We need something, so we buy something, and it doesn't work. So we play the victims. Oh, we were sold it under false pretenses, under this FUD and this hype that's in our industry. At the end of the day, again, I'd pivot back to say this is a consumer problem, because why would you buy something that you can't operate? Why would you buy a car you don't know how to drive? Why would you buy a house? Why would you buy a piece of technology? So you're absolutely right. And I think we buy this thing under pressure because of the FUD. So it's a circle that we're caught in. We talked about the cybersecurity circle of failure. That's part of the circle. We can't get out of that circle. We can't break that circle. But I don't believe that just claiming we're victims is an adequate response. All right. We need to hold up our hand and say, stop. 40% of the time, this thing is wrong. Even if I had the people, you're wasting 40% of my time. And that's unacceptable. And that's the level of quality that I'm advocating. Is it fit for purpose? Do you think 40% of the time wrong is fit for purpose? No, it's not. And I don't see that we see that. We look to vendors in our industry as leaders, and we look to leaders for solutions. And you're right. We shouldn't name names, but pick the top 10 leaders in our industry, and in our product industry, every single one of them has been breached in the last 18 months. Take the top 10 managed security service providers in our industry. Every single one of them has been breached in the last 18 months. Now, isn't it odd, that they are struggling with the same problems that we're struggling with? They're not shepherds, they're sheep. They can't secure their own systems. And it's this dichotomy that we, as a buyer, as a consumer, that we don't seem to see geez, we're buying a product from so-and-so and they were just breached 2 weeks ago. That logic. And to me, if we took that first step, Jon, that first step, and suddenly things like conversations of zero trust and strategy become all the more clear about what work needs to be done. If our products don't work, we need to make that better. If they're insecure by design, we need to make that better. And we need to address that step 1, step 2, step 3. So the products that we do buy serve a purpose, serve a function, and they identify, they help minimize, they help manage the risk, according to our strategy. And that to me is, or I don't know, maybe I'm caught in a view circle because I keep seeing this comes back to us. By the way, I am the biggest failure in my industry for not record. This is my point of the article and the point of the paper is that we as cybersecurity professionals perhaps are responsible for this failure because we haven't asked for more, we haven't demanded more, we haven't expected more, and we're not going to get it until we do.
Very good. So, boy, what a great conversation, Richard. We're actually out of time. Anything that I didn't have an opportunity to touch on that you just want to, quickly address for our viewers?
We covered a lot. I got lost in there, and I apologize if I got a little preachy. Jon, it's an old man, and as I've told ISACA, I appreciate the format. I appreciate the vehicle for airing this perspective. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm not particularly happy. But I don't want to leave you with this idea that I'm negative or I'm critical. Okay, I very much am trying to with that article and the white paper and the way I've approached my job. I'm out there trying to say, if you agree with me, then be a part of this change that you want to see. It's like that Eastern, philosophy, be the change you wish to see in your industry. And that's what I see. And that's what I'm trying to poke other information security professionals and prod them and say, are you happy with this? Are you happy with these conditions? Because if not, if you don't speak up, because you're the professional, you're the security expert, how do you expect your company or your clients or whatever your role is, how do you expect to really get the most for them? And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to poke people and get them to pay attention and say, if you believe this, what are we going to do about it? And I thank you for your time and thanks for the discussion, Jon. As usual, it was very lively. You were true to form, and again, I thank ISACA for allowing me as an ISACA member to float this perspective.
Well, I'm a big fan of those that are having the hard conversations. This truly is one of the best aspects of my role here at ISACA, to give platforms to things, to highlight messages, and to also be able to for us to just have, challenge the status quo. So I really thank you for your time, the work that you're doing for the community at large, for your work here with my colleagues across ISACA. We didn't have an opportunity to talk about it, but those, you did recently speak at our Europe conference. So thank you so much for your selflessness as you continue to just, push this big boulder uphill. So thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Jon.